Picture this. It's Friday night, 1985. You're wearing your best acid-wash jeans and your friend just picked you up in their dad's Camaro. The cassette deck is blasting "Don't You Forget About Me," and you've got exactly $3 in your pocket to last the whole night at the mall. No smartphones, no internet, no way for your parents to track you. If you remember what that freedom felt like, this video is about to take you back. Because being a teenager in 1985, it was a world that doesn't exist anymore. Welcome to Timewashed Stories, where we step back in time and relive the moments that shaped us. I'm here to take you on a journey through memory, one story at a time. Let's talk about how you looked in 1985. Because your appearance, it said everything. If you were a guy, chances are you spent at least 20 minutes in the bathroom getting your hair just right. We're talking serious volume here. Mousse wasn't optional, it was essential. You'd spray, you'd tease, you'd blow dry until your hair defied gravity. The goal was height, and lots of it. Mullets were everywhere. Business in the front, party in the back, and nobody thought twice about it. Your wardrobe probably included at least one members-only jacket, probably in burgundy or tan. You wore it everywhere. It made you feel like you belonged to something exclusive, even though everyone else was wearing one too. Underneath, you had a pastel polo shirt with the collar popped. Not just up, but standing at full attention. And if you were really styling, you layered two polos, both collars popped. For the girls, big hair wasn't just a trend, it was a lifestyle. You'd wake up an hour early just to tease and spray your bangs into a perfect wall of hair that could withstand hurricane-force winds. Your go-to outfit? Oversized sweatshirts worn off one shoulder over a neon tank top, leggings, probably in electric pink or teal, and leg warmers. Even though you weren't dancing, they just looked cool. Both guys and girls lived in their Converse high tops or Reebok freestyle sneakers. And don't even get me started on the accessories. Girls layered dozens of rubber bracelets up their arms in every color imaginable. The more you had, the cooler you were. Everyone wore Swatch watches, and if you were really dedicated to the aesthetic, you wore 2 or 3 at once. Acid-wash denim was king. Your jeans were tight, stone-washed, and probably had strategic rips in them that you may or may not have created yourself with a cheese grater and some bleach. The lighter and more distressed, the better. And here's the thing, you didn't order any of this online. You went to the mall, you tried things on, and you saved up your allowance or your paycheck from your after-school job to afford it. Fashion took effort in 1985. It took time. And when you finally got that perfect outfit together, you felt invincible. Now let's walk through those school doors and remember what a day in your life actually looked like. The morning started early. Your alarm clock was one of those old-school digital numbers with the red LED display and the radio function. If you were lucky, you woke up to the tail end of "Wake Me Up Before You Go Go" or "Shout" by Tears for Fears. If you weren't lucky, it was just a harsh buzzing sound that jolted you awake. You got dressed in your bedroom, probably while listening to Casey Kasem's Countdown from the weekend on a tape you recorded off the radio. Then you grabbed your Trapper Keeper, that glorious 3-ring binder with the Velcro closure. Yours probably had a Lisa Frank design, or a sports car, or maybe Van Halen on the cover. Inside were your peachy folders, carefully labeled for each subject. And if you were like most teenagers, the margins of those folders were covered in doodles, band logos, and the name of your crush written over and over in different styles. Getting to school meant one of 3 things. You walked, you got dropped off by a parent, or if you were old enough and lucky enough, you drove. And driving in 1985, that was freedom like nothing else. Your car probably wasn't anything special, maybe an old Chevy Nova or a hand-me-down station wagon, but it was yours. You had a bumper sticker or two, and that car smelled like a combination of old French fries, vinyl seats, and whatever air freshener was dangling from the rearview mirror. Once you got to school, you hit your locker. It was metal, it was dented, and it smelled faintly like gym socks and old textbooks. You decorated the inside with magazine cutouts, photos from the drugstore, and maybe a small mirror. You definitely had a picture of your friends taped up, or maybe John Stamos or Molly Ringwald if you were feeling bold. Classes were different then. No PowerPoint presentations, no laptops. Your teacher wrote on a chalkboard with actual chalk. You took notes by hand, in spiral notebooks, and your hand cramped by third period. If you needed to do research, you went to the library and used the card catalog. Remember that? Those little wooden drawers filled with index cards. You'd write down call numbers on a scrap of paper and hunt through the stacks, hoping the book you needed wasn't already checked out. In English class, you read The Catcher in the Rye or Lord of the Flies, and you discussed them out loud, no Google to give you the summary. You actually had to read it. In math, you used a calculator the size of a brick if your teacher even allowed calculators. Most of the time, you did it longhand. Lunch was loud and chaotic and deeply political. Where you sat mattered. The jocks had their table, the burnouts smoked in the parking lot, the nerds gathered near the vending machines, the popular kids held court in the center of the cafeteria, and everyone else just tried to find their spot. You brought lunch from home in a brown paper bag, or you bought the hot lunch, Pizza Day being the undisputed champion. And here's something every 80s teen did without realizing it. You passed notes. Folded into elaborate triangles or squares, passed hand to hand during class when the teacher wasn't looking. Getting caught meant public humiliation as the teacher read it aloud, or even worse, it got confiscated. But the thrill of secret communication was worth the risk. If you got in trouble, you got detention or you got sent to the principal's office. There was no emailing your parents. The school called home on a landline, and you prayed nobody was there to answer. Music wasn't just something you listened to in 1985. It was everything. It was your identity, your mood, your entire social world. And it all started with MTV Music Television. It actually played music videos. Imagine that. You'd come home from school, flip on the TV, and there it was. A constant stream of music and visuals that you couldn't get anywhere else. Video Killed the Radio Star had done its job. Now, seeing the music mattered just as much as hearing it. MTV made stars overnight. It's how you discovered Duran Duran, how you fell in love with Madonna, how you realized that Prince was a genius. The VJs, Martha Quinn, Mark Goodman, Nina Blackwood, they were like your cool older friends introducing you to the next big thing. 1985 was an iconic year. Like a Virgin was still dominating. Madonna was everywhere, on MTV, on posters and magazines, and she was controversial in the best way your parents didn't quite get her, which made you love her even more. Bruce Springsteen's Born in the USA was still massive. You couldn't escape it, and honestly, you didn't want to. It was the anthem. Then there was We Are the World. That song brought together every major artist you could think of. All for a good cause. You knew every word, and you definitely sang along at full volume whether you could carry a tune or not. Wham! Was splitting up, which broke hearts everywhere. George Michael was about to go solo. Tears for Fears released Everybody Wants to Rule the World, and it was the soundtrack to every moment of self-reflection you had that year. And if you wanted harder stuff, you had it. Mötley Crüe, Def Leppard, Bon Jovi. Pour Some Sugar on Me wasn't out yet, but the hair metal scene was building into something unstoppable. You wore the t-shirts, you knew the lyrics, and you absolutely cranked it up when your parents weren't home. The Breakfast Club came out in 1985. If you saw it in theaters, you remember walking out feeling seen. It didn't matter if you were a brain, an athlete, a basket case, a princess, or a criminal. That movie got it. It understood what it felt like to be a teenager. And that Simple Minds song, it became the anthem of an entire generation. Back to the Future came out that summer, and it blew your mind. Marty McFly, the DeLorean, the flux capacitor. You wanted a hoverboard, you quoted the movie endlessly, and Huey Lewis and the News became even cooler than they already were. Rocky IV came out at the end of the year. You cheered when Rocky beat Drago. It wasn't subtle, but it didn't need to be. And you bought the soundtrack because that Survivor song, Burning Heart, was mandatory workout music. Here's something only real 80s teens will remember. You made mixtapes. You sat by the radio with your finger hovering over the record button, waiting for your favorite song to come on. You had to time it perfectly to avoid the DJ talking over the intro. Then, you'd carefully arrange the songs, labeling the cassette with your best handwriting. You'd make one for yourself or for someone special. A mixtape wasn't just music. It was a message. It was effort. It meant something. When the weekend came, you had one destination: the mall. The mall wasn't just a place to shop. It was the place to be. It was your social hub, your entertainment center, your escape from home. You'd get dropped off by a parent, or you'd drive there yourself, and you'd meet your friends by the fountain or outside the Orange Julius. You didn't need a plan. You just walked. You wandered from store to store, not necessarily buying anything, just being there. You'd hit up the Gap, where everything was perfectly folded and smelled like new denim. You'd stop at Chess King or Merry-Go-Round, trying on jackets you couldn't afford. You'd browse the record store, flipping through albums, checking out the new releases, maybe buying a single if you had the cash. The girls would spend an hour in Claire's, trying on earrings and spraying every perfume sample available. Guys would loiter outside Foot Locker, checking out the latest sneakers. And then there was the arcade. If you remember this, you can still hear the sound. That cacophony of bleeps, bloops, digital explosions, and the clatter of tokens dropping into slots. The arcade was dark, loud, and packed. It smelled like popcorn, carpet, and teenage ambition. You played Pac-Man, Galaga, Donkey Kong, or Spy Hunter. If you were really good, you got your initials on the high score screen, a badge of honor that lasted until someone better came along. You mastered the timing on Dragon's Lair. Even though it ate your quarters faster than anything else, you pumped token after token into those machines, fully aware you were never going to beat them. But it didn't matter. It was about the experience. Did you ever spend hours at the mall arcade? Tell me your go-to machine in the comments. I want to know. Some of you spent time at the food court, Orange Julius, Sparrow, hot dog on a stick. You pooled your money with friends and shared a giant cookie from Mrs. Fields. You made $3 last all afternoon, and somehow it was enough. And if you were trying to impress someone, maybe you saw a movie at the mall theater. Tickets were cheap, popcorn was cheaper, and sitting in the back row? That was the whole point before you left. You stopped at Sam Goody or Walden Books, maybe flipped through the latest issue of Tiger Beat or Rolling Stone. You checked the time on the big clock in the center court and realized you had to leave soon. Your ride was coming, or you had to be home by dark, or you'd already pushed curfew too far. The mall in 1985 wasn't just retail. It was life. Let's talk about your relationships, because in 1985, staying connected took real effort. Your friendships were built on time spent together. You didn't text, you didn't DM, you called the house on a landline, and you hoped your friend answered instead of their mom or dad. If they weren't home, you left a message. You made plans in advance. You said, "Meet me at the park at 3, and you showed up at 3. If someone didn't show, you just waited, because there was no way to reach them. You talked for hours on that corded phone, the one in the kitchen or the hallway, twirling the spiral cord around your finger while your parents yelled at you to get off because they were expecting a call. If you were lucky, you had your own phone in your room, probably a clear one where you could see all the little components inside. Friendships were documented in photo albums. You took pictures with disposable cameras or 35mm film. Then you waited a week to get them developed at the drugstore. Half of them were blurry or had someone's thumb in the corner, but you kept them anyway. You wrote on the backs, dated them, and tucked them into photo corners in a scrapbook. Dating was a different beast entirely. If you liked someone, you couldn't stalk their social media. You had to actually talk to them. You passed notes. You had your friend tell their friend that you liked them. You hoped they'd sit near you at lunch or show up at the same party. If you were going steady, that was a big deal. You gave them your class ring or your Letterman jacket. Everyone knew you were together. You held hands in the hallway, you sat together at football games, and you talked on the phone every single night, even if you'd just seen each other at school. Going on a date meant getting picked up at your house. You had to meet the parents. There was no sneaking around that. Your date came to the door, shook hands, made small talk. It was awkward and formal and absolutely nerve-wracking. Then you went to a movie, or grabbed a burger at the local diner, or parked somewhere and just talked for hours with the radio on. Breaking up was brutal because you couldn't just block someone. You still had to see them every day at school. You'd have to navigate the cafeteria, the hallways, the shared friend group. Drama was unavoidable. Parties were legendary. Someone's parents would go out of town, and the word would spread like wildfire. No Facebook invites, just word of mouth. You'd show up, and there'd be a keg in the backyard or a cooler full of cheap beer someone's older sibling bought. Music blasted from a boombox. You'd stand around, talk, maybe play quarters or flip cup, and you always had someone on lookout duty in case the cops or the parents came home early. Your social life required effort, planning, and presence. You couldn't half pay attention while scrolling. You were all in, face to face, living in the moment, and because of that, the connections you made felt deeper. Let's talk about the technology that defined your teenage years, because compared to now, it was almost prehistoric. But back then, it was cutting edge. The Walkman was everything. Sony's portable cassette player changed the game. You could take your music anywhere. You'd clip it to your belt, thread the headphones under your shirt, and walk down the street with your own personal soundtrack. The foam pads on those headphones wore out fast, but you kept using them anyway. You'd make mixtapes specifically for your Walkman, curating the perfect playlist for your walk to school or your bus ride or just lying in bed staring at the ceiling. But here's the thing. If you wanted to skip a song, you couldn't just tap a screen. You had to fast forward, guess where the next song started, rewind if you overshot, repeat, and if the tape got eaten, you had to carefully pull it out and try to wind it back in with a pencil. Sometimes it worked, sometimes your favorite tape was ruined forever. At home you had a stereo system, probably a big one with a dual cassette deck so you could dub tapes, a radio tuner, a turntable if you were still holding onto your vinyl, and speakers that actually had weight to them. You'd spend hours recording songs off the radio, carefully pressing pause between tracks to avoid dead air. The telephone was your lifeline. That beige or off-white rotary phone, or if you were modern, a push-button touch tone. You knew your friends' numbers by heart, that you didn't have a contacts list. It was all memory. You'd dial, listen to the ring, and hope for the best. If you got a busy signal, you'd hang up and try again in 5 minutes. Answering machines were just becoming common, that little tape recorder connected to the phone that would pick up when you weren't home. You'd record an outgoing message, trying to sound cool and casual. "Hey, you've reached the Smith residence. Leave a message at the beep." And people actually left messages, long ones. You'd come home, see the red light blinking, and press play to hear who called. If you needed to look something up, you used an encyclopedia. World Book, Britannica, whatever set your family had on the shelf. You'd pull down the heavy volume, flip through the thin pages, and read. If the information wasn't there, you were out of luck unless you could get to a library. Computers existed, but they weren't in every home. If you had one, it was probably a Commodore 64 or an Apple IIE. You played Oregon Trail in the school computer lab. You learned basic programming and felt like a hacker when you could make the screen print your name in a loop. The internet didn't exist yet. Not for regular people. No email, no instant messaging, no web browsing. Everything was offline. Video games were huge. Nintendo was about to launch in the US later in 1985. But before that, you had Atari or ColecoVision or Intellivision. You played on a TV in the living room, probably fighting with your siblings for a turn. Games were simple but addictive. You couldn't save your progress, so you either beat the game in one sitting or you left the console on for days. Cameras were film-based. You had a finite number of shots, usually 24 or 36. You had to choose your moments carefully. No deleting, no retakes unless you wanted to waste the shot. You took the roll to the store, dropped it off, and waited. When you picked up your prints, that's when you found out if your pictures turned out. Sometimes they were perfect. Sometimes they were disasters. But either way, they were real and physical and permanent. This was your technology, limited, tactile, intentional. And because it was limited, you used it more thoughtfully. Now let's step inside your house and remember what home felt like in 1985. Your house probably had wood paneling, shag carpet, or linoleum floors that had seen better days. The furniture was sturdy and a little outdated. Your family room had a TV, probably a big console model with dials and fake wood trim. It got 3 to 5 channels clearly, maybe a few more if the antenna was positioned just right. If you wanted to change the channel, you got up and turned the dial. Remote controls existed, but they were clunky, wired, or only worked half the time. You watched TV with your family. There was no streaming, no on-demand, no binge-watching. You watched what was on when it was on. Thursday nights meant The Cosby Show. You gathered around and watched together. Sitcoms had laugh tracks. Dramas had theme songs you'd sing along to. Saturday mornings were for cartoons, and you woke up early to catch them all. If you wanted to watch a movie at home, you rented a VCR and a VHS tape from the video store. Blockbuster was just getting started. You'd browse the aisles, pick a tape in its oversized plastic case, take it home, pop it in, and hit play. You had to rewind it when you were done. Be kind, rewind. Or you'd get charged a fee. Dinner was a sit-down event. Your family ate together at the table most nights. No phones to distract you because phones didn't leave the wall. Your mom or dad cooked. The microwave was a newer technology, and it was mostly used for reheating leftovers or making popcorn. Meals were simple, home-cooked, and you were expected to be there. Your room was your sanctuary. You had posters on the walls, ripped carefully from the centerfolds of magazines. Madonna, Michael Jackson, sports stars, movie characters, cars, whatever reflected who you were or who you wanted to be. You had a clock radio on your nightstand. You had books on a shelf, actual paper books with dog-eared pages and cracked spines. You had a diary with a tiny lock and key where you wrote your secrets in pen, knowing your little sibling was definitely trying to find it. Chores were non-negotiable. You mowed the lawn, you took out the trash, you did the dishes, you got an allowance if you were lucky, maybe $5 or $10 a week. That money had to stretch. You saved it for the things that mattered. Your parents didn't track your every move. You'd leave the house in the morning, and as long as you were back by dinner or by dark, you were good. Freedom came with responsibility. You learned to navigate the world without a GPS or a phone call away. You figured things out, and when you got in trouble, there were consequences. Grounding meant you stayed home. No car, no phone calls, no going out. You were stuck, and you had to sit with it. There was no sneaking onto the internet because the internet didn't exist. You were truly cut off. Family dynamics were different, less structured in some ways, more in others. You had more independence, but also more accountability. You were expected to grow up a little faster, to handle things on your own. And somehow, you did. So what did you worry about? What kept you up at night in 1985? You worried about fitting in? You worried about being cool. You worried about your hair, your clothes, whether people liked you. You worried about your crush finding out you liked them. Or worse, not liking you back. You worried about grades, about getting into college, about what you were going to do with your life. You worried about your parents finding out you went to that party, or snuck out, or lied about where you were. The world felt big, but also distant. The Cold War was still happening. You knew about nuclear threats in a vague, background kind of way. You'd seen The Day After on TV, and it scared you, but it also felt unreal, like something that happened in movies, not in life. You were aware of issues. AIDS was becoming a headline, but it still felt like something that happened to other people in other places. Your immediate world was what mattered most. Your friends, your school, your town. That was your universe. And what did you dream about? You dreamed about the future, but a future that wasn't so far away. You dreamed about graduating, about freedom, about getting your own place or your own car or your own life. You dreamed about love, real love, the kind you saw in movies and heard about in songs. You dreamed about success, however you defined it, maybe fame, maybe money, maybe just happiness. You dreamed about getting out. Whether that meant leaving your small town or just becoming the person you wanted to be. You felt like the world was wide open, like anything was possible if you just worked hard enough or wanted it badly enough. Here's what's interesting. You didn't document everything, you didn't post about your feelings or share your thoughts with hundreds of people. You kept a lot inside, or you shared it with one or two close friends. You lived more privately, which meant your inner world was more yours. Your thoughts, your dreams, your fears, they were personal in a way that's hard to replicate now. And the memories you made? They stayed in your head, or in a shoebox of photos, or in the stories you'd tell years later. They weren't time-stamped and geotagged, they were just yours. And maybe that made them more precious. Let's get specific for a moment. Let's talk about what things actually cost and what the little details of the world looked like in 1985. A gallon of gas cost about $1.15. You could fill up your tank for under $20. A movie ticket was around $3. A large popcorn and a soda added maybe another $3. A new cassette tape cost about $8 or $9. A vinyl album was about the same. If you wanted to buy a new pair of Levi's, you'd pay around $30. A pair of Converse? $20. Minimum wage was $3.35 an hour. If you worked part-time after school, you'd pull in maybe $50 or $60 a week. That was enough for gas, food, and a little bit of fun. The biggest trends? Rubik's Cubes were still everywhere. People were still trying to solve them, carrying them around like a badge of intellectual honor. Cabbage Patch Kids were the toy phenomenon, with parents literally fighting in stores to get one for Christmas. Transformers were huge. G.I. Joe was relaunching. He-Man and She-Ra dominated Saturday morning cartoons. The Challenger space shuttle was a symbol of hope and progress. Kids wanted to be astronauts. The future felt exciting and full of possibility. Nobody could have predicted what would happen just a few months later in January of 1986 on TV. Everyone watched Dynasty and Dallas for the drama, Knight Rider and the A-Team for action. Cheers was the comedy everyone quoted. MTV was still new enough to feel revolutionary. In sports, the Bears were on their way to dominating the Super Bowl with the legendary '85 team and that iconic Super Bowl shuffle. Larry Bird and Magic Johnson were turning basketball into appointment viewing. Hulk Hogan was the face of wrestling, and kids everywhere were learning to body slam their siblings. Culturally, 1985 was right in the sweet spot. The energy of the early '80s was still there, but things were starting to mature, starting to shift. The music was getting more polished, the movies more ambitious. Technology was advancing but hadn't taken over yet. There was a balance, a moment where everything felt both exciting and manageable. And you were right in the middle of it, living it, not knowing that decades later, people would look back on it as a golden era. To you, it was just life. It was just being a teenager, figuring things out, making mistakes, making memories, becoming who you were going to be. Being a teenager in 1985 wasn't perfect. It had its struggles, its awkwardness, its pain. But there was something undeniably special about it. There was a simplicity, not in the sense that life was easy, but in the sense that things were more direct, more human, more present. You lived in the moment because you had no choice. You weren't distracted by 1,000 digital voices. You were there, fully there, with your friends, with your family, with yourself. You made mistakes without them being recorded forever. You had privacy. You had space to grow and change and figure out who you were without an audience. The music was the soundtrack to your life, literally. The movies felt like they were made just for you. The friendships you built were built on time and effort and showing up. The memories you made were yours to keep, vivid and real and untouched by algorithms or filters. If you lived through 1985 as a teenager, you were part of something unique, a generation that stood at the crossroads between the analog past and the digital future. You got to experience a world that moved slower, felt bigger, and somehow, even with all its limitations, gave you more freedom than kids today can imagine. So take a moment. Close your eyes if you need to. Hear that song on the radio, Smell the cologne or perfume, feel the vinyl seats in that old car. Remember the sound of the arcade, the taste of mall food court pizza, the feeling of waiting for your crush to call. Remember what it felt like to be young in 1985. It's gone now. That world doesn't exist anymore. But it happened. You were there. And nobody can take that away from you. I'd love to hear your memories. What was your favorite part about being a teenager in 1985? What do you miss most? Drop a comment below, and let's keep this conversation going. And if you want to take more trips back in time with me, subscribe to Timewashed Stories. We've got so many eras left to explore together. Thanks for watching. Until next time, keep those memories alive.